Hey, Wolfman here. I was just going to talk a little bit about uh, something from my childhood that kind of had a, kind of an impact on my life. Happened, well, back in middle school, probably around 1980. I would have been in 6th grade at the time. It would have been the spring semester. And it's kind of funny because it's just a game. That a lot of the kids were playing at that time. Adults, of course, were doing it as well. Um, it was Dungeons and Dragons. A friend of mine first introduced it to me in class. He came and he brought a couple of miniatures with him, little lead miniatures used in the game. At that time, I really wasn't interested in fantasy at all. Didn't really read any of novels, books, or anything related to the subject. Had no interest in anything on, movie-wise or anything that was out at that time. But he brought these little miniatures into class with him, I remember. And the little lead figures, one was like, they were painted. He said he got them from a friend of his that he played the game with. And it seemed like after class, when we were in lunch, he was telling me about how the game worked and about adventure and using your mind to imagine things that were happening and figuring out problems and how to work with friends to accomplish a goal together. And it really intrigued me. And I was basically kind of thinking about it later that day when I went home. And turns out, within like that week, he bought the box set, which at that time there's a basic box set for Dungeons and Dragons. Is made, I think they call it the Holmes edition. And the box basically, like on my t-shirt I have, featured this dragon with a, looked like a, what they call the magic user and a fighter. Confronting him, apparently to kill him, slay him, and take his hoard of treasure. He showed me the box set he had, and I was pretty much hooked right there hooked into it. I was like, yeah, I want to play this game. So that very first box set he had what they called the Blue Book. Now I have my actual stuff from way back then, which I have dug out. I don't have the box anymore. That was lost long ago, but the Blue Book still exists. It was a basically rules that would get you from level 1 to 3. Very much different than what the game is today, and how the game turned into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons around that same time, or a few years before that. And the book came with the book, also had a module with it. Now if you either got module B2 to keep on the Borderlands, or it would have included B1 in Search of the Unknown. Now our sets did not come with dice per se, the very familiar polyhedral dice. They came with what they call chits, and in those they were basically numbered papers that you would cut out, and they were basically 1 through 20 for a 20-sided dice, 1 through 4 for your 4-sided, 1 to 8, etc. And you would take these chits, put them in little cups. We had Dixie cups full of these things. You'd shake them up, reach in, pick out a number, and that's how you determined your rolls. Well, anyway, back to it. I wanted to try this game out, and my friend didn't really have a whole, he wasn't really up on the rules so much, but he was enthusiastic. So he acted as the DM, Dungeon Master, and I was going to be the player. I remember rolling up my first character. We used our little Dixie cups full of chits, and I made, at the time, what was a thief, and not really knowing much about the rules or anything, either of us, My thief was decked out in full plate armor, carried a two-handed sword, and was ready to go on his first adventure. Also, without us knowing much about the rules, because at that time I didn't have the rule book, but he did. But he kind of like skipped over reading a lot of it. He rolled. We had some dice. We rolled for movement on the map. Actually, he had the little pieces of rolled up paper, and he'd put them on the map, and he'd move them around through the dungeon. And my little thief, who was decked out in all this armor, went through and basically acted like a fighter, slaughtering everything in this dungeon. Now, we were like 12 or 13 years old at the time, and didn't have a grasp of the rules, of course, but our imaginations were running wild, and we had a great time. We played the same module a few times over, and finally I convinced my mother at the time to get myself that same edition, that boxed edition. Back then, I found it in a grocery store. I remember getting it home, and I started actually reading the rule book. So that blue book that my friends kind of glanced over, didn't really pay much attention to most of the rules, I kind of deep dived into it at age 12 or 13 and read everything. And immediately I decided to take on the role as DM, and we played it with me running it. And it went a little differently than when he did it, because I knew what the rules were supposed to be, how you're supposed to follow them. Kind of made it a little, set things up a little more, I guess, strict is what we would say. You couldn't have a thief wearing plate armor, of course. You couldn't have your magic user running around swinging a sword, and as that would be, and of course you couldn't have your fighter casting spells. So I had a little better grasp of the rules, and I started DMing the game for a while. Now, just going back also on that, I can remember back in school, lots of kids started playing the game, and we met other kids who played, and eventually we got together with other groups of people who played, and we moved on to the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. And our little, me and him just playing with each other, on weekends or whatever, it turned into, we would have a group of like 8 other players playing, doing the advanced game. Another thing I remember about those days also, it was becoming very popular in the schools, and kids were like sneaking the books in to class and reading them instead of doing their schoolwork. And I do remember having my books covered with the book covers that we used for covering our textbooks, so I could sneak it into my English class and have a skim through the books while I was supposed to be doing other things. I got caught a few times by my teachers doing that. Usually it means your book would get confiscated till the end of class, but they didn't seem to be too mindful of it, because it seemed like, hey, these kids are reading. It seems to be something making them use their minds creatively, and it turned out to be not such a bad thing, even though that was around the time of the Satanic Panic when that began. Now, I said the gaming kind of had an influence on my life later on. One thing it did do, I was always kind of into art. I loved drawing. After I discovered the game and seen what back in those days, the very kind of primitive, amateurish artwork that was in the books, they didn't have very, many good artists. I do remember the main two, David Sutherland III and Dave Trampier, were two of the main artists. I really enjoyed the drawings of Trampier, and basically after seeing a lot of those works in the different books, I tried to imitate his drawing style, and eventually got good at what I do, and basically that is a lot of what I do now too. I do art. Not necessarily just fantasy art, but I do a lot of line-based art using ink and painting. That was actually my major in college was fine arts, so I have a little bit of, I guess, my old D&D gaming from way back when to kind of thank for pointing me in that direction. Also, other things, it got kids together to, do things other than run around causing trouble. If you weren't a kid that was like an athlete who didn't play a lot of sports, was not good at sports, this was a way you can kind of relate to other kids in that same, nerdy, geeky, more scholastically, more into, bookish kind of kids rather than the ones who are playing sports. I do remember my friends also, we had a thing too when we had, getting our larger groups together. Back in those days, girls really didn't play D&D. A lot of them didn't. It was very rare. Well, I remember at that time recruiting my sister, my younger sister, to play, and she joined me and she really enjoyed it. Another friend of mine did the same, recruited his sister. Well, all of a sudden, there's 2 girls in our gaming group. Well, they invited friends as well, so over the years, starting back in 1980, there's always been, female players in any group I've ever been in. In my last gaming group, it was 50-50. As a matter of fact, other friends, female players, had brought their kids in to play, their daughters or whatever. My niece actually was playing in my last gaming group too, and she's 25 years old now and runs games with her friends. So it's just a way of also, besides just having fun, socializing with your friends. And I kind of miss those early days because that was when you were at your most kind of imaginative, I think. When you were first starting out playing these games, it was new to you. I mean, I've played over the decades, but I don't think anything really compares to when you were first discovering it. Whether it maybe someone who had just started maybe a couple of years ago, in the newer editions, they probably had that same feeling when they first started playing. And I think it kind of hits that creative thing in your mind, using your imagination. I don't see it as unhealthy unless you obsess too much with the thing, where if that's all that becomes your life, maybe a little too much. But if you use it as just basically a way of escapism every once in a while with your friends, finding creative ways to get out of problems with your friends in the gaming setting, I think it's kind of a healthy thing. So, really don't know where this whole conversation was going, but that's kind of it. I'll talk more on D&D and different things in the future, but I just kind of wanted to share that. Have a good one. Thanks.